Welcome back. We're talking about the culture of connectivity, how social media is changing our society. Joining me from Los Angeles is Mimi Ito, cultural anthropologist and part of the Connected Learning Alliance. And from New York, Jill Emanuel is a clinical psychologist with the Child Mind Institute. Thanks so much, both of you, for joining us. Let's go to you, Mimi Ito, out west first. This is the first generation of children connected to social media. We have no roadmap. What's going on here? How young are they using it? What is the implications of having all this information in their hands?
Yeah, I think young people today are growing up in very interesting times and in an environment that is so different from what we grew up in. I feel like it's important to start first with a recognition that it's kind of amazing that they're growing up in an environment where they have such abundant access to information and social connectivity, which is a good thing. But I think it's also important to realize that because of this, they have to develop new kinds of capacities to make wise choices, to be mindful, to disconnect appropriately, to manage their personas in public much earlier than we had to do growing up.
Jill Emanuel in New York, you're a psychologist. What does the effect have on these tiny brains and also tiny personalities growing up?
Well, it's, there's research that's being conducted on this, and we're not so sure of the results of the actual effect on the brains quite yet. But what we are seeing is that the kids are using a lot of, obviously their patterns of behavior and their methods of interacting with one another are very different at this point. And they're growing up, as Dr. Ito was saying, they're growing up in an environment where they're much more connected and in a different kind of way. And we have to understand a little bit better what's going on.
Jill, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Being connected with everyone and everything all the time around the world? I grew up where the only people you really talked to were your neighbors and you were out on the streets riding bikes together. It's very different.
It's very, very different at this point. I think to say it's either a good thing or a bad thing, I don't think it's actually quite that simple. I think you have to see it from both angles. There are really good things about this connectivity, people being able to understand each other, people being able to connect to different cultures, different walks of life. And there's also some negative things about it in terms of there being too much use, in terms of there being too much comparison to other people, in terms of not being able to get a sense to know yourself. So you have to look at it from a very balanced perspective.
Yeah, that's a good point. Mimi, what about kids who find it difficult to establish relationships? Especially from a young age, that's social characteristics are always encouraged by parents. Can social media act as a brake on that, or does it accelerate it?
I think what we've found from the research is that there's a tremendous amount of variability in how families and children are engaging, and the general tendency is that it amplifies things that are already there in the family environment or in the kids' disposition, whether that's positive or negative. So young people who are, really eager to learn, really into some kind of specialized subject, they can go so deep, so much faster, and have access to, college level educational material by the time they're in middle school. It gives them superpowers, but it also gives tools for kids to disconnect from peers or from relationships that aren't going so well for them. And there can be some, consequences to that happening, which are not always positive as well.
Yeah, the nightmare for any father like me is puberty and dating. How's this affecting social media on kids just starting to get into that sort of thing?
Well, I mean, clearly it's very different from the way it was when we were growing up. So a lot of the connectivity is happening online. A lot of people are meeting each other online, even as early in their tweens. And dating even can consist of an online relationship rather than it being just that regular school relationship. So we're seeing very much changes. There's also a lot more interaction. So you can have constant interaction with that person and that you're interested in, unlike before we had to talk to them on the phone or see them in person. So the relationships are more rapidly developing and dissipating more quickly.
Mimi, so this is a 21st century PayPal, nothing to worry about? Pen pals?
Yeah, The effect on relationships, I would agree, it's been very interesting because suddenly there's this possibility to be always connected to your most intimate circle, and that imposes a new burden, a new emotional burden, a new relational burden. And we find that young people more and more are, taking steps to sort of say, look, there are times when we need to disconnect, whether it's from a romantic partner, from peers, and you have to actually work to achieve that distance because the default for kids is that they're always connected to that inner circle.
Is there a digital divide? Because not everyone can afford Wi-Fi at top speeds and the latest smartphone. Mimi, are we seeing a digital divide when it comes to our kids growing up?
Yeah, it's very interesting right now because we are in an era where most people, can find some kind of digital device or connectivity if you, live in urban kinds of settings or industrialized settings. But there is a growing divide that's actually come about because of smartphones where, for something like social media in an era when it was all about Facebook, you could access from any device, you could access from a community center, school, or library. But in an era of Instagram and Snapchat, you have to have the smartphone with a data plan, and it's a much more expensive economic proposition. So, we thought we were getting over the digital divide, and suddenly there's this new technology that has created a new divide between, the kids, young people who have access to the mobile connectivity and those who don't.
Jill, I want to talk to you about the dark side of being connected all the time, especially for kids and teens growing up. We're talking about potential predators, but also bullying, which is a big problem anyway, regardless of the megaphone that social media creates. Your thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. There are definitely dark sides. So cyberbullying is a huge problem that people are paying attention to. And a lot of it goes on behind the scenes. And a lot of the times parents and teachers and other people, adults in the children's lives, don't know what's going on until much later. And it often can become a source of problems for those children in terms of they start to show symptoms of anxiety disorders or depressive disorders or even just oppositional behavior. The other dark side that we're seeing is a real social comparison issue where kids are looking at the lives of other kids and thinking that they're not good enough. And it really is taking a toll on the children's self-esteem.
Can you follow up on that self-doubt? The ultimate selfie seems to be the thing that every kid wants to have, looking great for their friends, sharing that. That can really create perverse body image ideas, can't it? And also feed into this self-doubt that no one's ever quite good enough.
Absolutely. I mean, not only does it create very, very rigid standards of body images, but also rigid standards of being. So, for example, a child really will look at the perfect life of the children that they're associated with and the kids in their school and think, I'm never going to be good enough. And they are trying constantly to measure up. And it's all, as a lot of articles have come out recently, a lot of it is just a facade. It's actually not the real side of what these kids are actually dealing with on a regular basis. So it's a big show in a way, and a lot of kids are buying into it.
So Mimi Ito, in Los Angeles, what about the parents? Where do we come in here and making sure that our kids have a rich social media experience without the downside? Can we?
I think parents, I think educators, just caring adults in kids' lives have a tremendous role to play. And, whether it's social media or games, I know that a lot of adults don't feel equipped to necessarily understand exactly what's going on, but I think if you realize that at the foundation, kids are doing what they've always done and struggled with, popularity, friendships, romantic relationships. These are things that we all have experience and wisdom about, and if we can get to the point where we're understanding that those underlying drivers are really the same. They're happening on a different kind of stage, and we can have the same kind of meaningful mentoring conversations that we've always had with our children.
Mimi, what does that mean in black and white? Does that mean taking the smartphone away before bedtime? Does that mean having the computer in a place where everyone can see it at all times? Give us some advice here.
Well, I think a lot of it depends on the age of your child and what's appropriate for that particular age. But I think the important thing to realize is that we have to help our kids develop the capacity to make wise choices, to regulate their media use, to negotiate with their peers. We have to develop their capacity to do that. And the longer we wait and take that role of policing and monitoring, turning off the Wi-Fi, the longer it will take them to step up to really take on those capacities themselves. So sure, for younger children, certain kinds of rules and boundaries are really appropriate, but as they grow older, it's important to realize that unlike when we were growing up, kids today really have to learn how to manage those things on their own much earlier, and we have to support them rather than be the police and monitors on doing the external enforcement.
Jill, would you agree with that? What advice would you give parents? And can we act as examples by turning our devices off as well, I suppose?
Oh my gosh! First of all, I very much agree with all of that, and you really want to encourage the children to take not only charge of what they're doing, but really being responsible for it in a positive way. So some of the things I'll tell parents, sometimes I tell them, have your child tell you about Snapchat and Instagram. Have them show you the ropes. Get to know the media that your child is using, so you all have a better sense of it together. The other thing is parents are models. So sure, parents want to absolutely show that, hey, I'm going to put the phone down and we're going to have a conversation together. I'm going to not turn off the phone for the evening and we're going to interact rather than just constantly checking the phone and seeing what's going on themselves, and modeling that wonderful behavior of just being involved and being attuned to what's going on around them. Very important.